The winter of 1802 found Sarah Webb at the worst possible moment. Her husband James had died in the autumn from fever, leaving her alone with their 8-year-old daughter Clara and a piece of land on a hillside outside the settlement of Millbrook, Ohio Territory. The cabin that had once been their home now belonged to James's brothers, who had made it clear the widow and child were not welcome to stay. Sarah sat on the edge of the wooden platform outside the old cabin, watching her daughter play with a broken wooden horse. The snow hadn't come yet, but the cold December wind carried its promise. She had 3 choices: return to her parents in the distant Pennsylvania settlement where she'd be a burden, marry quickly to some widower who needed a working hand, or do something no woman in the settlement had done before. "Clara," she called, her voice firmer than she felt. "Come here. I need to tell you something." The little girl ran to her, brown braids bouncing beneath her woolen cap. "What is it, Mama?" "We're going to build a house, you and me, on grandfather's land on the hill." Clara's eyes widened. "By ourselves, without the uncles?" "By ourselves, and not just a house. We'll build a little house for chickens too, because we're going to raise chickens. We'll have eggs every day." "But Mama," Clara said quietly, "ladies don't build houses." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "This lady will." The next day, when Sarah announced her plans at the settlement trading post where she'd gone seeking hired hands, the laughter was deafening. "A woman! Build a house!" guffawed Tom Blackwell, the biggest carpenter in the area. "Next thing, you'll tell us she can shoe horses too. It'll fall on their heads before she gets a roof up," added his brother Samuel. "Sarah, quit this foolishness. Marry Ezra Shepherd. He's been looking for a wife since his first one died." "Ezra smells like sheep and has hands like wooden mallets," Sarah replied calmly. "Thank you, but no." Old Widow Hutchins, sitting in the corner with a cup of cider, cackled through her missing teeth. "I've seen much in my 90 years, but a woman building a house? That's against nature. God will punish her." "Perhaps God wants to see what we can do before we dismiss ourselves," Sarah said. "My husband's good name means you'll sell me lumber and materials. I'll pay in labor afterwards if I must." The laughter gradually died down, replaced by curiosity. Tom Blackwell scratched his beard. "All right, Sarah, we'll sell you the materials. But when your little shanty collapses, don't come crying to us." Sarah pulled out her small purse of coins, all her savings, and placed it on the counter. "Deal." Over the next weeks, as winter still delayed, Sarah and Clara worked like oxen. The first task was clearing the hillside site. The parcel of land her father had given her as dowry years ago was overgrown with brush and saplings. Wild roses tangled through blackberry bushes and young oak trees had taken root in what was once pasture. Sarah attacked the brush with borrowed tools, a rusty scythe, an axe with a loose handle. Her hands, soft from years of cooking and sewing, split open within the first hour. She wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from her petticoat and kept working. Clara dragged away branches, her small face set in fierce concentration, determined to match her mother's effort. The work was backbreaking. Every evening Sarah's shoulders screamed in protest, and her lower back felt like hot coals pressed against her spine. But she couldn't stop. Winter was coming, and with it, the deadline of survival. Either they would have shelter, or they would not. "Why are we building a house like a cave, Mama?" Clara asked one day as they gathered stones from the creek bed, their skirts muddy and their boots soaked through. Sarah had stayed awake many nights, sketching on pieces of bark with charcoal. She'd seen how old shepherds in the mountains made shelters, half buried in the earth, that stayed warm in winter and cool in summer. She'd seen how they built arched roofs that shed snow and rain. This wasn't a traditional rectangular log cabin, but Sarah didn't have the strength to raise such heavy constructions, nor the money to hire help. She needed to work with the land, not against it. She needed to be smart, not strong. Because the earth will help us, Clara. It will keep us from the cold. We'll build a house that embraces the hill, not fights it. The ground stays warmer than the air in winter, cooler in summer. If we build into the hillside, we'll need less wood, less heat, less of everything we don't have. Clara considered this, her young mind processing the logic. So we're being clever? Exactly, we're being clever. First, they dug. Oh Lord, how they dug. Sarah swung the pickaxe until her hands blistered, then calloused hard as wood. Each strike of the pickaxe sent shock waves up her arms, jarring her teeth. The ground was harder than she'd anticipated, packed clay mixed with rocks that had settled there for centuries. Some rocks were so large she had to dig around them, then use a lever to pry them free, inch by painful inch. Clara filled baskets with excavated soil and carried them aside, dumping them to create a growing mound. The baskets were heavy for her small frame, but she never complained. Sometimes Sarah would catch her daughter's face twisted in effort, lips pressed together in determination, and her heart would break and swell simultaneously. They worked from dawn to dusk, stopping only for bread with cheese and onions, and sometimes not even that. Sarah had to ration their food carefully, what little they had needed to last until spring, or until she could find work, whichever came first. Some days her stomach cramped with hunger, but she always gave Clara the larger portion. Settlers passed them on the road that wound past the hillside. At first, they were merely curious, then openly mocking. "Still digging, Sarah?" one would shout. "Maybe she's making a hole to hide in when she gets embarrassed." Another would laugh, slapping his knee at his own wit. "Digging to China, are you?" yelled a third. But Sarah didn't answer. She just kept digging, kept swinging the pickaxe, kept hauling out rocks and soil. Each taunt made her grip the handle tighter. Each laugh made her dig deeper. She would show them. She would show them all. After 2 weeks, they had an excavation 1/2 meter deep and 4 meters wide into the gentle slope of the hill. Sarah had planned everything carefully. The house would burrow partially into the earth, with the front wall jutting out and the back almost completely embraced by the hillside. "Now the real work begins," she told Clara. The carpenters had delivered the pine logs, straight but not too thick, just what Sarah could lift with leverage and strength born of desperation. She also had sacks of lime for mortar, a bale of straw, and stone slabs for foundation. Sarah began with the foundation. She laid flat stones at the bottom of the excavation, creating a level surface. This alone took 3 days, selecting stones of the right size, testing them for level with a plumb line she'd fashioned from string and a rock, adjusting and readjusting until everything was perfectly horizontal. Between the stones, she poured mortar she'd mixed in a large wooden trough, lime, sand, and water, stirred until her arms went numb and her shoulders burned. The mortar making itself was an art she'd learned by watching, by asking questions of the old stonemason who'd built the settlement's meeting house. She had to get the proportions exactly right. Too much water and it would never set properly. Too little, and it would crumble. She mixed it with a flat wooden paddle, round and round, feeling the texture change, learning to recognize when it was perfect. "See, Clara," she explained as she worked, her daughter crouched beside her, watching intently. The mortar is like cheese between pieces of bread. It holds everything together. When it dries, it becomes hard as rock. But while it's wet, we can shape it, mold it, make it do what we need. Clara nodded seriously, absorbing every word. She'd become Sarah's little apprentice, handing over tools before Sarah asked, holding the end of measuring ropes, even helping mix mortar with her small feet, stomping through it like she was crushing grapes for wine. Her legs would be covered in gray splatter by day's end, but she was learning. She was understanding. And that, Sarah knew, was worth more than gold. "Can I pour some, Mama?" Clara asked one afternoon. Sarah hesitated. Mortar was precious. They couldn't afford to waste a single batch. But then she saw the eagerness in her daughter's eyes, the need to contribute not just labor, but skill. "All right, but slowly. Pour it right into this gap here." Clara lifted the small bucket with both hands, tipping it carefully. The mortar flowed thick and gray, filling the space between two foundation stones. It wasn't perfect, she spilled a little, but it would work. "Well done," Sarah said, and meant it. After the foundation came the walls. Sarah used a technique she'd seen in old stone barns, alternating layers of logs and mortar. She placed the first row of pine logs in an arched shape, their ends terminating deep into the hillside at the back. The weight of the earth behind them would hold everything stable, she hoped. It was a calculated risk, based on observation and logic rather than formal training. The work was methodical but exhausting. Lift a log, position it, check for level, adjust, pack mortar around it, move to the next. Each log had to be carefully selected for straightness and strength. Each placement had to be considered for how it would affect the structure above. Sarah felt like she was building a puzzle, where a single wrong piece could bring everything crashing down. But one log was too heavy. It was a beauty. Perfectly straight, no knots, about 10 feet long. Exactly what she needed for the main arch support. But it must have weighed 200 pounds. Sarah tried to lift it, braced her shoulder under it, strained until the veins stood out on her neck, pulled until her vision blurred, and fell backward in the mud with a splash. "Mama!" Clara cried, rushing to her side. Sarah lay there for a moment, staring at the gray December sky. Every muscle ached. Her hands were cut and bleeding. She was tired to the marrow of her bones. For one brief moment she thought, maybe they were right. Maybe this is foolishness. Maybe I'm killing myself and my daughter for nothing. Maybe we should just accept charity, accept whatever life hands us, stop fighting so hard. Then she felt Clara's small, warm hand in hers, squeezing tight. "Get up, Mama. We can do it. I'll help. You always say 2 hands are better than 1. We have 4 hands together." Sarah looked into her daughter's serious little face, James's face, his stubbornness, her own fire. This child believed in her. This child was learning from her. What lesson would she teach if she gave up now? And she got up. Mud dripped from her hair and dress, but she got up. "You're right. We'll use leverage, and we'll use our brains, since we can't rely on our strength alone." Using a long beam as a lever and a rock for fulcrum, the two of them managed to move the log into place. It took an hour of incremental progress. Lift one end a few inches, prop it, lift the other end, prop it, slide it forward bit by bit. But it worked. When the log finally settled into position, perfectly placed in the arch, Sarah sat back and actually laughed. A sound of triumph and relief mixed together. Row by row, log by log, the walls grew. Sarah left a gap, about 8 inches, between the logs, which she filled with thick mortar mixed with straw for insulation. The straw was Clara's idea. She'd noticed how birds used grass in their nests to keep warm and suggested it might work in walls too. Sarah was amazed and proud. This created stripes in the wall: dark logs, light mortar, dark logs, light mortar. It looked like a pattern, almost decorative. Several of the settler women who passed by actually stopped to admire it. "Well, I'll be," said Martha Grimes, the blacksmith's wife. "It's actually pretty." "Pretty doesn't keep you warm," sniffed her companion, but Martha just shook her head. "No, but it don't hurt neither. Takes a certain eye to make something both useful and nice. I give her credit for that." "It's beautiful, Mama," Clara said one day, looking at the growing wall with her head tilted, studying it like a painting. The winter sun was setting, casting long shadows that made the stripes stand out even more. "Things don't just have to work, Clara. They can be beautiful too. Your papa taught me that. He always said a good chair should be comfortable and handsome. A good house should keep you safe and make you smile when you look at it." "I smile when I look at our house," Clara said simply. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." Weeks passed. December became January. Snow finally came, light at first, then heavier. Sarah built a temporary shelter from saplings and canvas, where she and Clara slept, huddled together under all the blankets they owned. It was barely adequate. Some mornings Sarah woke to find frost on the inside of the canvas, and Clara's lips tinged slightly blue, despite being wrapped in every layer they had. Those were the hardest mornings. Sarah would wake before dawn, her body stiff and aching, and wonder how they would survive. She'd hold Clara close, feeling her daughter's small body shiver and think, "Am I being brave or am I being foolish? Am I saving us or killing us?" But then the sun would rise, weak and pale through the winter clouds, and she would see the walls of their house growing from the hillside. Each day they were a little higher. Each day they looked a little more real. Each day they were closer to salvation. Every morning, the settlers noticed the walls were higher. The mockery began to fade, replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the faint beginnings of respect. "Remarkable," one murmured to his companion. "It'll still fall," another insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. "I don't know," said a third. "It looks sturdy enough to me. Strange, but sturdy." But old Widow Hutchins began bringing warm bread once a week, leaving it on a rock near the work site without saying a word. Sometimes there was cheese, too, or a jar of preserves. Sarah never saw her come. The old woman must have arrived before dawn. But the food was always there, still warm, wrapped in clean cloth. One morning, Sarah found not just bread, but a note, written in shaky script. "Stubborn is good. Keep going." Sarah folded the note and put it in her pocket, where she carried it every day after that. The hardest part was the roof. Sarah had to create an arch that would bear the weight of snow, shed water, and yet be constructible by a woman and child. She spent 3 nights lying awake, trying to solve the problem. Traditional roofs required massive beams she couldn't lift. Flat roofs would collapse under snow. She needed something else entirely. The solution came from watching tree branches bend in the wind without breaking. If she could replicate that flexibility and strength, maybe she could build a roof that worked with nature instead of fighting it. She made a frame from curved wooden ribs that she'd soaked and bent over weeks. This process alone was painstaking. She'd soaked young oak saplings in the creek, weighted them down with rocks, checked them daily until they were pliable. Then she'd bent them over a form she'd built, a curved wooden frame, and left them to dry in that shape. Some cracked and had to be discarded. Some didn't bend enough. But slowly, she accumulated enough good ribs to build her roof frame. The ribs formed an arched skeleton, which she covered with layers of flat pine boards, then sod cut from the hillside, then another thick wrapping of grass and soil. Each layer had to be added carefully, evenly distributed to avoid creating weak points. She worked from dawn past dusk, sometimes by moonlight when the moon was full enough to see by. "It's like when we make pie crust, isn't it, Mama?" Clara said one day, watching Sarah add another layer of sod. "Lots of layers make it strong." "Exactly, sweetheart. Each layer makes it stronger, and they all work together. The wood keeps it from caving in, the sod keeps it waterproof, the grass and soil keep us warm in winter and cool in summer." "You're really smart, Mama," Clara said simply. Sarah hugged her daughter close. "I'm just doing what needs doing, but thank you, my love." For the entrance, Sarah crafted a sturdy wooden door from leftover pine boards, nailed together with iron spikes she'd traded for 2 of her remaining chickens. She cut a small square window in the center of the door, covered with oiled paper that let light through but not cold. The door hung on hinges she'd bartered for with a promise of labor come spring. She'd help with the blacksmith's wife's garden planting. The chimney was the next challenge. Sarah built a simple stone and clay oven in the back corner of the house, with a chimney pipe of sheet metal rising through the roof. She'd saved for this, knowing that without heat, they'd freeze. The stovepipe cost her last coins, but watching it rise through the roof, knowing it would soon carry smoke from their own fire, made every penny worth it. While working on the main house, Sarah also began the smaller structure, the chicken coop. She used the same technique, but in miniature. She dug a shallower excavation, built lower arched walls with the same striped log and mortar style, created a smaller curved roof. Clara helped with every step, and by now she was nearly as skilled at mixing mortar as Sarah. "The chickens deserve a nice home too," Sarah explained to Clara. "If we treat them well, they'll treat us well with eggs every day." "Will they be warm enough?" Clara worried. "Warmer than we've been in our shelter," Sarah said wryly. "The earth will keep them cozy, just like it'll keep us cozy." Inside the coop, Sarah made simple nesting boxes from wooden crates lined with straw. She left the entrance open without a door. The chickens would come and go freely, and the arched entrance faced away from the prevailing winds, providing natural protection. The final touches took another week. Sarah built a small raised floor inside the coop so the chickens wouldn't be sleeping directly on cold earth. She installed a roosting bar from a smooth branch. She even carved a small decoration above the entrance, a simple heart shape, because why shouldn't chickens have beauty in their lives too? By February, the snow was heavy. Some nights, Sarah lay in their temporary shelter, listening to the wind howl, testing herself with questions. What if it fails? What if everything she's building collapses? What if the settlers were right? But every morning, she and Clara rose, cleared the snow, and kept working. In mid-February, the house was complete. It was low-slung. A person had to duck their head to enter, and curved, like something from a storybook. The front wall of striped logs and mortar jutted from the snow, solid and strong. The roof was heavily capped with white, with a short black metal stovepipe rising near the back edge. The chicken coop stood nearby, also snow-covered, its open entrance like a dark, welcoming cave. Sarah lit a fire in the stove. Smoke curled cheerfully from the chimney, announcing to the world that this house was alive. She closed the door. Inside, it was snug, but warm. Light filtered through the small window, casting golden squares on the packed earth floor. "We did it, Mama," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Sarah pulled her into an embrace, tears streaming down her snow-burned cheeks. "We did it, my little builder. We did it." The following weeks brought more work. Sarah built simple benches and a bed from timber, each piece fitted carefully together. She made a small table where they could eat their meals. She sealed cracks with clay and moss, improved insulation by stuffing dried grass into gaps, did everything she could to make their new home more comfortable. Every improvement mattered. Every detail counted toward making this not just shelter, but a real home. And the chickens. Sarah spent her last coins on 6 hens and a rooster from a neighboring settlement. She brought them in baskets, released them into the new coop. The birds looked puzzled at first, clucking and pecking cautiously, but soon began to roam about, pecking in the snow, bustling around the small space in front of their little door. Clara was enchanted. She ran every morning to check for eggs, her feet crunching through the snow, giggling with delight when she found the first 2 brown eggs nestled in the straw nests like precious treasures. "Look, Mama, look what they made!" She placed the eggs in a bright red clay pot that had belonged to her grandmother and carried it triumphantly into the house, walking carefully so as not to break them. The settlers began to come, at first from curiosity, then from something else. Perhaps respect, perhaps wonder at what they had witnessed. Tom Blackwell came first, claiming to check whether the lumber he'd sold was being used properly. He walked around the house, shaking his head. "Well," he said finally, taking off his hat and scratching his head. "It's strange, it's crooked, but damned if it isn't still standing." "And it will keep standing strong," Sarah replied. He looked at her closely, something like respect in his eyes. "I reckon it will. You've got a true carpenter's hands, Sarah Webb. If you ever need to earn money, come work for me." Others followed. Young women from the settlement came, staring wide-eyed at the cave house and its strange beauty. Some brought gifts, a jar of honey, a package of soap, a woolen blanket. Old Widow Hutchins came with one of her grandsons, leaning on her walking stick. "I had to see with my own eyes," she announced. "A woman who built a house." She entered, with Sarah supporting her elbow. Inside it was modest but clean and warm. The fire glowed in the stone stove. Dried herbs hung from the roof beams. A simple quilt covered the bed. Hutchins sat on the bench, her ancient face folded in deep wrinkles. "My dear," she said quietly, "you showed us something. You showed us that when life breaks you, you don't have to lie broken." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I just did what I had to do." "No, you did more than that. You did the impossible." By spring, the house bloomed. Sarah planted a vegetable garden behind the chicken coop. The hens laid regularly. Clara grew 2 inches taller and stronger, helping with every task. And when people passed on the road, they no longer laughed. They waved. They stopped to talk. They told strangers about the woman on the hill who built a house with her own hands. One warm April evening, Sarah and Clara stood in front of their house, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The snow had melted, leaving green grass growing around the 2 arched structures. The chickens clucked softly in their coop. Smoke curled lazily from the metal chimney. "Mama," Clara said, taking her mother's hand, "we're builders, aren't we?" Sarah looked at the house she'd carved from earth, wood, and determination. It wasn't perfect. The walls were slightly crooked. The roof wasn't completely symmetrical, but it stood firm. It kept them safe. "Yes, Clara, we're builders, and we can build whatever we decide to." Clara smiled, And in that smile, Sarah saw the future, not just for them, but for all the women who would come after. Women who would see this strange little house on the hill and would think, if she could, maybe I can too. The snow of the next winter fell softly on the curved roof, covering it with a white crown. Inside, the stove glowed warm. Clara sat at the table practicing her letters on pieces of bark. Sarah had decided her daughter would know how to read and write, another thing women rarely did. The chickens were tucked in straw nests, protected from the cold wind. And when the settlers told stories during the long winter nights, they told of Sarah and Clara, the mother and daughter who built a house when everyone said they couldn't. They told it to their children, who told it to theirs, until the story became more than fact. It became legend, proof that strength doesn't come only from muscles, but from a heart that refuses to give up. Over the years, others came. Widows seeking advice, young women dreaming of independence, girls who wanted to learn how to hold a hammer, how to mix mortar, how to build something that lasts. And Sarah taught them, not because she wanted fame or recognition, but because she understood something fundamental. When you build something with your own hands, you're not just building a house, you're building dignity, you're building strength, you're building a future. The little arched house on the hill stood for decades after, gradually becoming part of the landscape. So natural it seemed the earth had birthed it rather than human hands. And every time someone said something was impossible, the people of Millbrook pointed to the hill. "See that house?" they'd say. "Sarah and Clara built it, a woman and a child, in the winter of 1802, when everyone laughed." And in those words was more than a story. There was a promise, a lesson, a challenge to everyone who listened. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. Because if Sarah and Clara could build a house when the whole world said they couldn't, then maybe you can build your dreams too, no matter how impossible they seem. All you need is determination, love, and the willingness to keep working even when your hands bleed and your back aches, even when everyone laughs. Because in the end, the house will stand and the laughter will stop.